Former FBI agent turned informant and whistleblower Kyle Serafin reported recently that a memo had been circulating around the FBI titled "Interest of Racially and Ethically Motivated Violent Extremists in Radical-Traditionalist Catholic Ideology almost certainly presents new mitigation opportunities." The memo notes that the FBI investigations have found that there is a growing overlap between far-right white nationalist movements and RTCs, Radical Traditional Catholics. The document claims that RTCs are a small minority in the Catholic Church. They adhere to, quote, anti-Semitic, anti-immigrant, and anti-LGBT and white supremacy ideology, while also preferring the traditional Latin Mass. The memo notes that these Catholics reject the Second Vatican Council and show a disdain for popes elected since Vatican II. The FBI's source for this information is the Southern Poverty Law Center. The FBI has since confirmed to several news sites that it has removed the document from its system because it does not meet the exacting standards of the FBI. Texas GOP Representative Ronnie Jackson said, "Apparently devout Catholic Joe Biden is using his FBI to target Catholics. Wow, the FBI has truly become the enemy of the people. They actually declared war on Christians now. Unbelievable." It is important to note that not all of the groups mentioned in the memo, such as the FSSP, reject the Second Vatican Council or hold disdain for the last few popes. Now, of course, the allegation that traditional Latin Mass Catholics hold white supremacist or white nationalist ideology or present any threat to national security or to anyone at all is absurd. But that's what the left always says about someone they consider to be an enemy. They are automatically accused of being racist. And the Southern Poverty Law Center is a very leftist group. And we're used to this in the press, entertainment, and the media, which have long been bastions of leftist ideology, but this is the FBI. This is the federal government going after a religious group. Now, of course, they rescinded the memo saying, "We don't do that. We don't go after people based strictly on their religious beliefs." But let's face it, they got caught, and that's why they rescinded the memo. And while I appreciate Representative Ronnie Jackson's sentiments and his support, he's wrong. The federal government did not declare war on Christians in general. They declared war on Latin Mass Catholics. Similar to a few months ago when The Atlantic published an article complaining about the rosary being a weapon. Now, a lot of Protestant Christians get what's going on. The enemies of Christ have taken over every facet of our society, every government agency, and now they are imposing their will. And they're showing the world who their enemies are and what the true weapons of spiritual warfare are. And it's not the Pentecostals. There are no memos and articles saying we got to stop these people from praying in tongues. It's not the Seventh-day Adventist. They're not saying we got to stop these people because they worship on Saturday and that's the true day of worship. They're not saying we have to stop these Baptist preachers. Let's face it. Morality is not being preached from the pulpit anywhere, Catholic Church included. The people they are going after are not just Catholics, but Catholics who question Vatican II or reject it altogether and prefer the Latin Mass and question the last few popes. Well, this tells me a few things. One, I'm on the right side. Christ said they're going to come after you. And I'm sorry, but if I were a Protestant Christian or a regular Catholic, not a traditionalist, I'd have to wonder, why aren't they going after me? You see, this is how the church grows during persecution. When the devil has all the power and goes after Christ's church, it becomes very clear what is Christ's church. And it seems that it's not just the Catholic Church, but specifically Latin Mass, rosary praying, Vatican II rejecting or at least questioning, and Pope Francis not really liking Catholics. And if the powers that be today are going after the rosary and the Latin Mass, that's because Satan does not like the rosary and the Latin Mass. The rosary and the Latin Mass frustrate his plans, and he wants it stopped. You see, it's traditional Catholicism that hurts Satan and frustrates his plans. That's why when the modernists took over the Catholic Church in the mid-60s, they watered down the faith. The holy water is not as potent as it used to be. They took out exorcisms that used to be attached to it. Isn't that interesting? We no longer say the St. Michael prayer at the end of Mass as had been done for almost 100 years. And when the parishioners, the people, want to do it, it gets shut down by people such as Cardinal Cupich, which is what he did in Chicago when parishioners started praying the St. Michael prayer after Mass on their own. He said, stop. And of course, the draconian restrictions on the Latin Mass by Rome through Traditionis Custodes. And rumors are swirling, just as they did before Traditionis Custodes, that more restrictions, perhaps even a total ban on the Latin Mass, is coming, as well as forbiddance of any use of the old rite rituals, including the blessing of sacramentals such as rosaries and scapulars. It's becoming increasingly clear that it is traditional Catholicism that the devil hates, and that's why the Vatican and now apparently the federal government are trying to put a stop to it. Why? Because they question or reject altogether the Second Vatican Council, because they prefer the Latin Mass, they pray the rosary, and they don't like Francis? What? Why is that any of the FBI's business? Aren't we supposed to have freedom of religion? Isn't there such a thing as separation of church and state? Of course, this just proves that separation of church and state and freedom of religion are impossible to attain, and never have been nor will ever be attained. But you're not going to see people abandoning the Latin Mass. If anything, it's going to cause it to increase, because the real Christians who truly wish to follow Christ, regardless of what church they go to now, are going to see that it's these guys that the devil's going after, and Christ must be there, and not necessarily where they are, because they're not getting persecuted. But as traditionalists, most of us are not surprised at any of this. We've known this was going to happen for decades, centuries even. The Catholic prophets have told us this was going to happen, and one of the things that they warned us was going to happen was that the Mass was not going to be allowed to be said anywhere in the world. Now it has become clear that yes, it will be enforced by secular governments when that time comes. Despite the claim of neutrality on religious matters, they'll just find another reason, like baseless claims of racism. And our Lord warned us through the prophetess Mary Julie Jahaney of a new Mass that would displease him. On May 10th in 1904, our Lord warned of the new liturgy that would one day be instituted. I give you a warning. The disciples who are not of my gospel are now working hard to remake, according to their ideas and under the influence of the enemy of souls, a Mass that contains words which are odious in my sight. When the fatal hour arrives where the faith of priests is put to the test, it will be these texts that will be celebrated in this second period. The first period is the one of my priesthood existing since me. The second is the one of persecution, when the enemies of the faith and the holy religion will impose their formulas in the book of the second celebration. Many of my holy priests will refuse this book, sealed with the words of the abyss. Unfortunately, amongst them are those who will accept it. And Our Lady said they will not stop on this hateful and sacrilegious road. They will go further to compromise all at once, and in one blow the holy church, the clergy, and the faith of my children. She announced the dispersion of pastors by the church herself, true pastors who will be replaced by others formed by hell. Keep in mind, at the time, the only Mass was what is today called the Latin Mass, or the traditional Latin Mass. So apparently our Lord prefers the Latin Mass. Well, if Jesus prefers the Latin Mass, then Satan hates it. And since the devil is in control of the world right now, through his agents, he will try to put a stop to it. Until my next video, God bless.